Video games are a fun way to pass the time, but could they be affecting the levels of aggression we see today? Video games and violence have been synonymous of each other since the first games came out, and everyone's still unsure whether or not they actually contribute to violence. And almost everyone plays games, and almost everyone either wants to have kids or already have kids. And what I tell you today may influence whether you yourself or let your kids play video games. Today I will be presenting 3 articles by scholars. First, some myths and facts, then how they've affected Japan, and lastly, some studies that people have done with video games and violence. Let's jump right in with the myths. Violent video games, myths, facts, and unanswered questions by Craig A. Anderson. First off, there's lots of confusion around the subject. There's been lots of tests, but almost all of them have come back with mixed results and nothing conclusive. So why is it still a debated subject today? One reason is the active role in video games that you play that you don't in other media, such as television where you're just watching, whereas in video games you have to make the choice to be violent. One myth is that field experiments don't work, such as imitation of karate kicks are normal or not, and some experiment for biting, pinching, hitting, pushing, and pulling hair that isn't in games that do happen normally, but just because things happen normally doesn't mean that they're normal. They could have been taught by friends that have played video games, or they could be a poor imitation of what they did see in a game. Another myth is that no studies have linked violence to video games, whereas in fact, a few cases of violence such as delinquency, fighting in school, criminal activity such as assault and robbery have all been linked to video games. Now we should take a look at the birthplace of video games, Japan, and how the violence has affected them there. Controversy and Research in Japan by Akira Sakamoto. Video games mainly started in 1983 when Nintendo released the Family Computer, also known as the Famicom. Before the Famicom, people would have to go to an arcade or a coffee shop with huge computers and they'd have to pay a big premium to play them. They could also make video games, but that was a skill that most people didn't have and was very hard to learn. Video games blew up in 1985 when Mario Brothers released on the Famicom. This was the beginning of the term express run, where you would go home from work or school as fast as you could so you can play video games. After only a year, 3.9 million Famicoms had been sold, and it had become part of the family, hence the name Family Computer. The video game boom declined until Dragon Quest III, where kids would go to school and wait in front of stores for them to open so they could get their own copy. This is also when people would start beating other people up to take their copies of the game, and this was later called the Doroku Affair, because Doroku is short for Dragon Quest in Japanese. Akira Sakamoto thinks there are 3 main reasons why video games cause violence. One is the reward that we get from violence. For causing violence, you get high scores, new stories, cool music, and awesome images. The second reason is that we get used to the display of violence. Usually when you're angry, you just cool off and you don't act out. However, video games teach us that we can act out, and they'll teach us how we can act out. The third reason is VR. Virtual reality is a connection to the game that we never used to have before that may blur the lines between reality and video game and may teach kids that it's okay to be violent in real life as it is in video games. The third article focuses on different studies by various scientists. Aggression and Violence as Effects of Playing Violent Video Games by Renee Weber, Ute Ritterfield, and Anna Kosigina. This article says that violence used to not be so bad because it was a very crude depiction of real life. The violence was still there, but the pictures were so bad that it didn't affect children the way it does today. Today, with their hyper-realistic, almost indistinguishable from real-life video games, it's different, and they have the visual aid that they need to connect video games in real life. It says that video games are the worst type of media because you're taking part in the violence and not just a spectator to it. One hypothesis is the symbolic catharsis hypothesis, which says video games have the opposite effect and actually help let out aggression and vent and calm the person so that they let out their aggression on a virtual person rather than a real person. A second theory is the general aggression model, or GAM, and there's two main parts to the GAM: single episode and multi-episode. The single episode refers to aggression that is in the moment, such as frustration at the game or throwing a controller. Multi-episode GAM are long-term effects, such as a kid thinking it's okay to kick others or bully them. In conclusion, it is undeniable that video games and violence are connected in some way, shape, or form. Many tests have been done, yet no researchers can agree that video games are a big factor in violence or not. Some people don't think real world tests work, and others do because of the different definitions they have for aggression. One person might think it might be physical acts such as kicking or punching, and another may just think it's a rise in blood pressure. Either way, the effects of video games are everywhere, even in Japan, and no one can settle the debate. Video games are a staple of today, but we only have theories still. Whether you play video games or not, it's a hot topic, and the inclusion of ultra-violent video games only adds on to the debate. I am certain that as we learn more about the brain and our body, we will finally be able to put the question to rest: do video games cause violence? Thank you.